She was fired for giving food to a homeless man, but what she didn't know is that he was a millionaire in disguise. This act of kindness would change her life and the lives of thousands forever. It was a freezing winter night in Manhattan, and the wind sliced through the streets like sharp blades. Emily Johnson, wearing her white apron and a tired smile, served tables at the busy Coleman's Grill. Outside, snow piled up on the sidewalks, where an elderly man shivered against the wall. His eyes silently begged for help, but the rushing crowd ignored him. Emily's heart tightened at the sight. As she balanced steaming bowls of soup, Emily couldn't stop glancing at the man. His disheveled hair and torn coat revealed the harshness of life on the streets. When a strong gust of wind made him cough painfully, she knew she had to act. She waited for a moment when the manager wasn't looking, quickly preparing a plate of hot pasta. To complete her plan, she grabbed a spare blanket from the storage room. Walking carefully out the side door, Emily approached the old man. He looked up in surprise as the scent of food reached him. "Here, sir. It's too cold out here," she said softly, handing him the plate and the blanket. His hands trembled as he took them, his eyes filling with tears. He muttered a faint, "Thank you," his voice breaking with emotion. Emily smiled, feeling a strange peace inside. But peace didn't last long. Suddenly a harsh voice thundered behind her. "Emily, what do you think you're doing?" Richard Coleman, the owner of the restaurant, stood there with a cold expression. Striding forward, he snatched the plate from the man's hands with disdain. Emily froze, shocked at her boss's cruelty. Richard pointed toward the restaurant, forcing Emily back inside. "This is not a homeless shelter. Our customers don't want to see people like that outside our door," he barked. Emily tried to reason with him, saying she couldn't stand watching someone freeze and starve. But her words meant nothing to Richard, who only cared about profits and appearances. Emily returned to her tables, but she couldn't focus on her work. Her co-workers glanced at her with pity, knowing trouble was coming. The restaurant buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, yet outside a man was fighting for warmth and dignity. Emily felt torn between her duties and her conscience, though deep down she already knew which mattered most. That night, as customers sipped expensive wine, the old man remained on the sidewalk, now wrapped in the blanket she had given him. Emily watched from inside, her heart aching. She didn't know who he truly was, but something in his weary eyes told her he carried a hidden story, a story that would one day change everything. Meanwhile, Richard kept an eye on her, his jaw tight with anger. To him, compassion was weakness, a flaw that had no place in business. Each second that passed, his decision grew clearer. Emily had crossed the line he could not forgive. In his world, kindness was a liability. The old man sat quietly, holding the plate of food as if it were a treasure. Each bite brought flashes of distant memories, of places and faces he couldn't yet place. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that this young woman would play a far greater role in his life than either of them could imagine. As the snow fell, covering the streets like a silent blanket, the city carried on. Emily couldn't know that her small act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would forever change not only the man she helped, but also her own destiny. If this first chapter touched your heart, imagine what comes next. Don't miss it. Subscribe now and join us on this journey of kindness and redemption. The next morning, Emily arrived at work early, hoping things might settle down. But Richard was already waiting for her, sitting behind his desk with a cold, calculating stare. Without hesitation, he slid a folder of papers across the desk. "You're fired, Emily. What you did last night was unacceptable," he said, his voice flat and merciless. Emily tried to explain, her voice trembling but firm. "He was freezing out there, Richard. How could I just walk past him?" But her boss wasn't interested. In his mind, compassion was weakness, and weakness endangered his business. "Our customers don't want to see handouts outside my restaurant," he snapped. "That's not the image I built." His words cut through her like a blade. Emily felt tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. Slowly, she untied her apron, folded it neatly and placed it on the counter. It was her silent act of dignity, even as her world collapsed around her. As she walked out, her co-workers exchanged worried glances. Some admired her courage, others kept their heads down in fear. No one dared challenge Richard's authority. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed like a final judgment, sealing the end of her job. Outside, the city felt even colder. Emily walked aimlessly through the busy streets of Manhattan, each step heavier than the last. She had no savings, only overdue bills and rent hanging over her. Uncertainty clung to her like the winter wind, whispering doubts into her heart. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the old man she had helped. Was he still alive out there, fighting against the icy air? A part of her felt guilty, as if her punishment was the cost of her compassion. But deep down she knew she wouldn't have done anything differently. At that same moment, Richard stood by the restaurant window, watching her fade into the crowd. For a fleeting second, something about her unwavering gaze unsettled him. But his pride smothered the feeling, and he returned to his business, dismissing the thought as weakness. Down in the subway, Emily wrapped her coat tighter around her as she blended into the anonymous sea of commuters. Her mind raced with questions about her future. Maybe this was a chance to start over, though she had no idea how. The cold gnawed at her, but there was still a quiet flame of determination burning inside. She took a deep breath, forcing herself forward. Life had knocked her down before, and she had always managed to rise again. Somewhere inside, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The city's roar seemed to whisper promises of change, and somewhere out there, hidden among New York's countless streets, the mysterious old man she had helped was still watching her path. He carried within him a secret powerful enough to rewrite both of their lives forever. Emily wandered through the crowded streets, her mind weighed down by the loss of her job. As she passed a subway entrance, she froze. There he was, the same old man from the night before. His body shook violently from the cold, his face pale and drawn. People brushed past without noticing him, but Emily felt her heart twist again. Something inside told her she couldn't just walk away. She approached slowly, kneeling down to his level. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. His tired eyes lifted, and though his words stumbled, he whispered, "Cold. So cold." Emily felt a rush of compassion. Despite her own problems, she couldn't let him stay there. He was more than a stranger now. He was someone who needed her. Emily weighed her options quickly. She had barely enough money to feed herself, let alone take care of someone else. Still, she thought of the blanket she had given him, the way he had held it like a lifeline. "Come with me," she said, extending her hand. The man hesitated, but eventually allowed her to help him to his feet. His frailty alarmed her, yet she tightened her grip. Guiding him through the bustling streets, Emily felt the stares of strangers on her back. Some judged, some pitied, and others ignored them entirely. She kept walking, determined to reach her small Brooklyn apartment. Each step made her wonder if she was making the right choice, but her conscience told her it was the only one. She refused to let kindness be a mistake. Finally, they arrived at her modest building. Emily unlocked the door, her hands trembling as she realized what she had just committed to. Inside, her apartment was small and plain, but it was warm. She helped the old man sit down on her couch. "My name is Emily," she said gently. "What's yours?" He paused, struggling, then finally answered, "Michael, I think." Michael's name lingered in Emily's mind, though his uncertainty unsettled her. She offered him a cup of tea, watching his hands shake as he tried to hold it. "Thank you," he whispered, though his eyes remained clouded with confusion. It was clear he had nowhere else to go. Emily realized this wasn't just an act of charity anymore, it was a responsibility. As he settled into her couch, Michael stared blankly at the ceiling. His silence was heavy, broken only by occasional coughs. Emily noticed scars along his forehead, as though he had once suffered a serious injury. That, she thought, might explain the haze in his memory. He wasn't just homeless, he was lost in more ways than one. Despite her growing concerns, Emily felt a surprising sense of peace having him there. She fetched a spare blanket and draped it over him. "You can stay here tonight," she told him firmly. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Michael's eyes softened, and for the first time he looked at her with something more than confusion. He looked at her with gratitude. As night fell, Emily lay awake in her small bedroom, the city's distant sirens echoing outside. Her mind raced with questions. Who was Michael, really? What had happened to him? And why did she feel so strongly compelled to protect him? She knew she was risking her own security, but something about him told her this choice would matter. In the quiet of the night, Michael stirred, whispering in his sleep. Emily leaned closer and caught fragments of his words. Hotel. Meeting. Accident. She frowned, puzzled. These weren't the words of a man who had always lived on the streets. There was a story buried in his mind, waiting to surface. And Emily unknowingly had just stepped into it. The next morning, sunlight streamed weakly through Emily's thin curtains. Michael sat at the small kitchen table, staring at a newspaper Emily had brought home. His fingers traced the bold letters, and suddenly his expression tightened. He mumbled something about meetings and contracts, his voice shaky but urgent. Emily leaned in, realizing his mind was struggling to piece together fragments of a forgotten life. She noticed the way his eyes locked onto a picture of a luxury hotel ad. For a moment, his face seemed both familiar and alien, like someone caught between two worlds. "Do you recognize it?" Emily asked softly. Michael frowned, pressing his temples as though fighting a wall in his mind. I think I've been there," he said, almost afraid of his own words. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the language of an ordinary homeless man. Every flicker of memory hinted at something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. She tried not to push him too hard, fearing the strain might overwhelm him. Yet, she couldn't ignore the truth. Michael was no ordinary stranger. Michael grew restless, pacing the tiny apartment. "It's like pieces of a puzzle," he muttered. "I see lights, people, my name on something important." Emily watched him carefully, her heart torn between curiosity and concern. She wanted to help him, but she also knew her resources were running thin. How much longer could she carry this responsibility alone? That night, Emily sat on the couch across from Michael, her arms wrapped around her knees. He had fallen asleep, but his breathing was uneven, his dreams troubled. She whispered to herself, "Who are you really, Michael?" The silence gave no answer, but Emily knew she had stumbled into something far larger than she had imagined. Days passed, and Emily's life grew heavier with each sunrise. Without her job, she scrambled to take on temporary shifts cleaning, babysitting, anything that paid just enough to buy groceries. Michael, still weak and confused, depended on her completely. Every meal she cooked, every blanket she tucked around him, reminded her of how fragile he truly was. Her neighbors whispered about the strange man in her apartment. Some warned her he might be dangerous, others mocked her for wasting time on a lost cause. Emily kept her chin high, refusing to let their words shake her. Deep down, she believed there was something more to Michael, something worth fighting for. One evening, as Emily returned from a long shift washing dishes, she found Michael coughing violently on the couch. Fear gripped her chest as she rushed to his side with water. "I'll take care of you," she whispered, holding his trembling hand. He looked at her with tired eyes and said, "No one's ever cared for me like this before." Her own doubts haunted her at night. Bills piled on the counter, and the landlord's warnings echoed in her head. Yet when she saw Michael's frail figure resting under the blanket, she felt a strength she couldn't explain. His survival had become her mission, and she would not abandon him. That night, as she closed her eyes, Emily realized she was risking everything: her home, her stability, even her future. But she also knew this choice defined who she truly was. Compassion wasn't her weakness. It was her greatest strength, even if the world refused to see it that way. Michael grew stronger with each passing day. Though his memories still came in fragments, he often watched Emily as she cooked or cleaned, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude. She noticed the way he tried to help, folding blankets or washing dishes, even when his body still trembled. Their bond was no longer that of a stranger and a helper. It was becoming something deeper. One afternoon, Emily returned home exhausted from work to find Michael waiting with a cup of tea. "For you," he said softly, his hands unsteady but determined. She smiled, touched by the small gesture. It wasn't much, but it showed her he wanted to give back, even if only in little ways. In that moment, she realized trust had been built between them. They began to share stories, Emily about her childhood in Brooklyn, her dreams of opening a small cafe one day, Michael about the flashes of memory that haunted him. He spoke of elegant suits, expensive dinners, and meetings in glass towers. Emily listened carefully, sensing that each memory was a clue to who he really was. At night, their conversations grew longer. Emily found herself confiding fears she had never told anyone, while Michael admitted his fear of never regaining his identity. Their companionship brought comfort in the midst of uncertainty. For Emily, loneliness had always been a quiet shadow. Now, Michael's presence filled that silence. Though she still struggled financially, Emily began to feel a new kind of hope. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone in her fight. She had someone who trusted her, someone who depended on her. What she didn't yet realize was that Michael's past would soon burst into their fragile present and change everything. It was a grey Saturday morning when Emily stopped by a corner store to buy groceries. On her way out, a magazine cover caught her eye. The headline read, "Where is Michael Anderson? Hotel tycoon missing for months." Her heart pounded as she stared at the photo. The man in the picture, clean-shaven and dressed in a tailored suit, was the very same Michael sleeping on her couch. Emily grabbed the magazine, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. The article described Michael Anderson, a millionaire hotel magnate who had vanished after a car accident. Doctors suspected head trauma had caused memory loss. Emily's pulse raced suddenly. All his strange words, all his fragments of memory, made sense. He wasn't just lost, he was the Michael Anderson. She rushed home, slamming the door behind her. Michael looked up in surprise as Emily thrust the magazine into his hands. At first, his eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with recognition. "That's me," he whispered, his voice breaking. Memories began to flood in boardrooms, reporters, flashing cameras. His world, once buried in fog, started to return. Emily sat beside him, her heart torn between fear and relief. "Michael, you're not just anyone. You're a man who built an empire," she said quietly. He pressed his forehead into his hands, overwhelmed by the sudden truth. "And yet, without you, I would have died on the streets," he admitted. "You gave me back more than my life. You gave me a reason to live." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Michael's uneven breathing. For Emily, the discovery was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She had cared for him without knowing his past, but now the truth threatened to change everything between them. Their story had shifted, and neither of them could ever go back. Michael sat in silence, staring at the magazine cover as though it were a mirror from another lifetime. The weight of recognition pressed down on him and his hands trembled. Emily watched anxiously, unsure of what his return to memory would mean for their fragile connection. For weeks she had known him as a lost soul. Now he was a powerful man rediscovering himself. "I remember the accident," Michael whispered, his voice uneven. "The headlights, the crash, then darkness. I must have wandered the streets until my mind just forgot." Emily reached for his hand, steadying him. "You don't have to face this alone," she said. He looked at her with eyes filled with gratitude and conflict, torn between two worlds. For Emily, the truth was both terrifying and hopeful. If Michael truly was who the world claimed, he had resources beyond imagination. Yet she feared this revelation would pull him away from her. Would the Michael she had come to know vanish once he stepped back into the life of luxury and power? That night, Michael paced the apartment restlessly. "I need to go back, Emily. I need to reclaim my life," he said, his tone firm. She nodded, though her heart clenched at the thought of losing him. "Just don't forget who you are now," she whispered. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears. As dawn broke, Michael's determination solidified. He was ready to face the world again, but he also knew something vital. Emily had saved him. Without her compassion, he might never have remembered at all. Now he faced a choice: return as the man he once was, or as someone new, shaped by her kindness. Michael's reappearance in the business world spread like wildfire. News outlets called it a miracle. The missing tycoon had been found alive, but few knew the truth of where he had been. Standing tall once again, Michael wore his suit like armor, yet deep inside, he was no longer the man who had disappeared months ago. Emily stood by his side as he confronted Richard Coleman, the restaurant owner who had once humiliated her. Richard's face paled when Michael walked through the doors of Coleman's grill, confident and composed. "You!" Richard muttered, recognizing him instantly from the headlines. Michael's gaze was sharp, but there was no anger, only resolve. "I've decided to buy this place," Michael declared, handing Richard the paperwork. The older man stammered in disbelief. "You can't be serious." But Michael's voice carried authority. "This restaurant is no longer yours." Emily, stunned, realized what he had done, not out of revenge, but out of justice for her. As Richard stormed out defeated, Michael turned to Emily with a quiet smile. "This place belongs to you now," he said. "Run it as you see fit. Make it something better than what it ever was." Emily's eyes filled with tears, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore, it was a symbol of her courage. For Michael, the act marked his first step into a new life. He no longer wanted to rebuild his empire the way it was before. Instead, he wanted to use his wealth differently, guided not by greed but by compassion. And Emily, with her unwavering kindness, was at the heart of that vision. The restaurant reopened under a new name, Emily's Place. The sign glowed warmly against the cold New York night, a symbol of transformation. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from rigid formality to welcoming warmth. Emily managed the staff with kindness, ensuring no one felt the fear she once had. Customers quickly noticed the difference and returned in greater numbers. Emily poured her heart into every detail. The menu was filled with comfort food, meals that reminded people of home. On certain nights, she reserved tables for those who couldn't pay, believing everyone deserved dignity. "This isn't just a restaurant," she told Michael one evening. "It's a place where people matter more than money." Michael admired her vision. Watching Emily thrive in her new role gave him a sense of pride he had never felt in his former business life. The restaurant, once ruled by greed, now pulsed with compassion. Emily had turned pain into purpose, and Michael knew she was leading the way. Word spread quickly about Emily's Place, not just for its food, but for its heart. Reporters came to write stories, praising the young woman who transformed a restaurant into a haven. Customers lined up outside, eager to experience something rare, kindness served with every meal. Emily's once broken dream was now a reality. For Michael, it wasn't just about the restaurant, it was about proving that success could exist without cruelty. He stood in the background, letting Emily shine, proud to be by her side. Together, they were building something that defied the rules of business, and it was only the beginning. Richard Coleman's downfall was swift, but it left him bitter and broken. His name was tarnished, and he wandered the city searching for purpose. One evening, he stood outside Emily's Place, staring through the glass. Emily noticed him, and instead of turning him away, walked out to meet him. "Richard," she said gently, "why are you here?" He lowered his head, ashamed. "I lost everything," he admitted, "and I deserve it. I treated you cruelly." Emily listened, her heart conflicted. Part of her wanted to walk away, but compassion urged her otherwise. She remembered the man she had once begged for mercy and chose a different path. Inside the restaurant, Michael joined them. Richard braced himself, expecting anger. Instead, Michael said, "People can change. I did. Why not you?" Richard blinked, stunned by the unexpected offer of grace. The words cut through his pride like nothing else had. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of humility. Emily and Michael proposed something daring. They invited Richard to work for a new project. They were planning something far bigger than a restaurant. At first, he refused, certain they were mocking him. But Emily's eyes were sincere. "Redemption is real," she said softly. "You just have to choose it." Tears welled in Richard's eyes as he nodded slowly. It wasn't forgiveness he thought he deserved. but it was the lifeline he desperately needed. For the first time in his life, he felt what it meant to be seen not as a failure, but as someone capable of change. With Emily's place thriving, Michael and Emily set their sights on something greater. They founded the Open Heart Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping the homeless across New York. The foundation offered more than just meals. It provided shelters, medical care, and job training programs. It was a vision born from Emily's compassion and Michael's resources. The opening ceremony drew crowds of journalists and volunteers. Emily stood at the podium, her voice steady as she spoke. "No one should feel invisible in this city," she said. "Kindness can rebuild lives." Michael stood beside her, watching with pride as she inspired everyone present. The applause echoed with hope. Richard, now working with the foundation, found himself transformed by its mission. Once consumed by greed, he now dedicated his time to coordinating outreach teams. At first, many distrusted his presence, but his humility slowly won them over. He was proof that redemption wasn't just possible, it was powerful. The foundation's work quickly expanded. Soup kitchens turned into community centers, and volunteers poured in from every borough. Emily and Michael spent countless nights planning, ensuring that every dollar went directly to those in need. Their bond deepened as they built something larger than themselves. For Emily, the foundation became more than a project, it was her purpose. For Michael, it was redemption for years spent chasing wealth without meaning. Together, they created a movement that rippled across the city, proving that compassion could change not only lives but entire communities. 5 years passed, and Emily's place remained a beacon of hope in Manhattan. But now, its influence stretched far beyond the city. The Open Heart Foundation had spread across the United States, building centers in major cities. Each location carried the same spirit of compassion that Emily had first shown on that cold Manhattan night. Emily and Michael were no longer just partners in purpose, they were husband and wife. Their daughter, Sophie, filled their lives with laughter and reminded them why they fought so hard for a better world. At night, they often sat together, reflecting on the journey that had begun with a single plate of food. Reporters frequently sought them out, eager to tell their story, but Emily always redirected the spotlight. "This isn't about us," she said. "It's about every volunteer, every person who believes kindness is stronger than greed." Her humility touched hearts as much as her actions did. Richard, now fully redeemed, continued his work at the foundation. He had become a mentor to those struggling with their past mistakes, guiding them with honesty and empathy. His transformation stood as a testament to Emily and Michael's belief in second chances. Together, they had built not just an organization, but a legacy of love. Their empire wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed. And in Sophie's curious eyes, Emily and Michael saw the future, a generation that would carry the flame of compassion even further. On a warm spring morning, Emily and Michael walked hand in hand through Central Park, their daughter Sophie skipping happily beside them. The city buzzed with life, but for the family, time seemed to slow. They paused by a bench, watching Sophie chase pigeons with laughter that filled the air. For Emily and Michael, this moment was proof that love and kindness had reshaped their world. Emily thought back to the night she had lost her job for helping a stranger. That single act of compassion had seemed like a mistake at the time, but it had set her on a path toward a destiny she never imagined. She had gained not only a partner and a family, but also a mission that changed thousands of lives. Michael felt the same. Once defined by power and wealth, he now measured his success in smiles, meals served, and lives restored. The empire he had rebuilt with Emily was not one of hotels and profits, but of open hearts and second chances. He looked at Emily and whispered, "You saved me, and because of you, we've saved so many more." As the sun began to set, Sophie climbed onto her parents' laps, her small hands clutching theirs. "Tell me the story again," she begged, her eyes wide with curiosity. Emily smiled and began, "It started on a very cold night in Manhattan." Michael joined in, his voice filled with emotion. Their story had become not just their legacy, but Sophie's inheritance. Together, they knew the work was far from over. The foundation would continue to grow, touching more cities, more lives, and more hearts. But for now, sitting under the golden glow of the setting sun, they allowed themselves a moment of peace. Their journey had taught them a simple truth. One act of kindness could change the world forever. In the end, it wasn't wealth or power that changed lives, it was a simple act of kindness. Imagine what could happen if we all chose compassion today. This story began with one simple act of compassion. Now I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done in Emily's place? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story inspired you, subscribe to our channel so we can spread more stories of hope together.